Here they all come.
We'll get started in 1 minute. Give everybody 1 more minute. The after lunch webinar. Hopefully nobody's ready to take a nap. Fill up your coffee cups.
Get your Red Bull.
Ugh. Energy drinks aren't my thing. All right, we'll go ahead and get started as people kind of continue to filter in. So I want to welcome everyone to today's event. I'm certainly really excited for this. I think this research has been a long time coming, a partnership between McKinley Advisors and Association Analytics. So we're excited to share the results with you guys, kind of in 3 pieces. Patrick will get into that. You know, it comes at a time, I think, that's more relevant and pivotal time than ever, where we really need data to make decisions, right? We can't rely on our gut. The history doesn't always make sense to continue the trends because the environment has changed. So let's dive in and see what some of the industry challenges were, the results of the study, how to overcome them. But first, Patrick, do you want to tell us a little bit about McKinley?
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Like Julie mentioned, this work has been a collaboration between Association Analytics and McKinley Advisors. McKinley is a strategy consulting firm. We've been honored to serve the association community since 1994. Our work really is about being a trusted advisor to associations. And if you're familiar with us, if you've had the chance to work with us, you'll know that it really encompasses a range of types of engagements, from helping to figure out what should be in a strategic plan, which is very relevant to our conversation today, to developing new lines of business, to diversity and inclusion engagements, you name it. The way that we're able to facilitate that range of and breadth of engagement is through having quite honestly, 32 wicked smart people on staff that love coming to work every day and working with associations. We have 3 ASA fellows among that group, which we're very proud of. And today we're going to be focused on a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, data. Even if you look sort of in the logo on the lower right-hand side of the screen, you'll see our motto, look, learn, plan, and deliver, which is really a reflection of our data-driven culture, both internally, how we manage our group, as well as our advice to clients. I'm going to ask Julie to talk a little bit about Association Analytics. We've been fortunate to work with them on this project. A2, lives and breathes data every single day and has a really unique experience and perspective on this, helping associations to stand up their own data-driven strategies.
Great. So quickly, for those who don't know us or me, I'm Julie Shulo, CEO of Association Analytics. We were founded back in 1999. Right across the bridge, I'm sitting at home in Northwest DC, but right across the bridge in Arlington, Virginia is our headquarters, 30 plus growing staff members, great client pool, great customers on our product acumen. We focus exclusively on analytics for the association industry, 100% client retention, and continuing to grow around our product suite around acumen. We live and breathe data and analytics, and really it's our mission to change the way this industry does business. so they can leverage data easily that they already have to make decisions to further their mission. So that's what we're about. I'm going to be moderating today. I do encourage everybody, anybody knows this, that joins our events, to talk it up in the chat. I already see everybody kind of introducing themselves, saying hi to friends. I know it's been a long time since we've probably seen each other. Also, questions for Patrick and David as we move through the session, throw them in there, or there's a Q&A function at the bottom. Either or, throw them out there. We'll have them answer them throughout, as well as ask you guys some questions. So definitely want this to be interactive. With that, Patrick and David, do you want to introduce yourselves and get this kicked off?
My pleasure, thank you. So I'm Patrick Glazier. I'm the Vice President of Research and Analytics here at McKinley Advisors. I started out my career in research about 20 years ago, where I quickly moved to the association community. My initial role was as the Director of Research Standards for the Marketing Research Association. And I wanted to give you that context because throughout the years, I've seen data really change. What we used to consider data has evolved so that some of those old methodologies have become untenable. New ones have popped up and offered new opportunities, but also new challenges with them. And it's something that's rapidly advancing every day. And I realize as I'm talking to you and throughout this presentation, David and I have some anecdotes and some information just about where associations find themselves in a sort of spectrum of maturity in utilizing data. The Marketing Research Association, by the way, is a good microcosm of this. They themselves went through an evolution a couple of years ago, changed their name to the Insights Association, in part as a recognition that what we consider to be data has changed quite a bit. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, really it's about data being a means to an end and not the ends itself, which is something we're always reminding ourselves of. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Hello, everyone. David DiLorenzo. I'm the COO and serve as the Chief Product Officer at Association Analytics. It's great to see a lot of our clients online and see everybody out there. And for those of you I know, hello, and for I don't, nice to meet you all. I've been around a little bit longer than Patrick. That's why I don't have anything left up here, and it's getting a little whiter down here. I've been in the association space for well over 25 years, and most of that in the technology sector, serving with as various roles in associations from CIO to EVP, and prior to coming to Association Analytics, worked at Delcor Technologies running a CIO practice. So, you know, this is a great event for me, and two things near and dear to my heart: data and strategy. You know, I've seen a lot of different things out there, and hope to bring a little insights and to the event today. But as I said, let's kick it off and get into the study. This was something that was really, really important for A2. So I'm looking forward to getting the word out to you guys and talking a little bit with you today. So Patrick, let's move into it.
Great. So McKinley and A2 recently completed this work. You know, the focus for us really was on understanding how you all are using your data within your associations. What do you find to be the strengths, weaknesses, challenges, that sort of thing in your day-to-day use of data information? And really, we wanted to see how things have matured for all of you. It is a very fast-moving field. There are new technologies and use cases every single day. And we realize that can be a little bit bewildering, exasperating if you're not, you know, in the line of business of working with these technologies like A2 is. And so for us, it's really a chance to come together, not only learn how all of you have used these technologies, but also through our webinar today to encourage some conversation around, you know, what are your challenges and how have you dealt with them? To that end, I'd like to encourage you, as Julie and David both mentioned, just please share your thoughts in the chat function. Julie will kind of pipe those over to us as we move along. And that's one of the ways that this webinar can really be useful. So we've divided this up into three different components. The first one today is on strategy. How are we using data to support organizational strategy? David and I are going to talk through just a couple of data points from the study, and we'll give you lots of anecdotes and a good handful of recommendations as well. Part two of our webinar series involves operationalizing data and analytics. So literally, how do you measure data? What's a good data governance policy to make sure that you're getting the most out of it? You can think about today as what are the right business questions? Operationalizing data is how do you measure that data? And then the third piece of the series is really informing a more specific use case, actually using data to drive member and customer experiences. So that'll be a little bit more granular. Hope you can join us for all three. This data is based on a study that we ran earlier this year, end of February, early March. And this was really just, if memory serves, on the cusp of COVID, on the cusp of the pandemic coming out. So it really reflects viewpoints at that point in time. We had about 180 responses to a survey where we did have the opportunity to ask about all of these trends. And the survey was of all of you. It was McKinley and Association Analytics database. So this reflects, association executives and staff and just a range of viewpoints. I do want to name that sort of elephant in the room, which is that the pandemic, when it hit, really shook things up for all of us. From my perspective, one of the ways that it's impacted me personally the most, in a professional sense at least, is that decisions seem to come all that much quicker nowadays. You might think that the pandemic on its face slowed down business. Well, there are just so many more challenges, so many more decisions to make. And it's really forced us to get very focused on delivering value as associations and making sure that we're always on point with both of our data as well as our decision making. So just to acknowledge that, David has a little bit of anecdotal pieces to his presentation where he's going to talk us through some of the trends that Association Analytics has seen and how associations have really been affected by all of this and what it means for their data strategies as well. Okay, David, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, so I'm talk to you guys a little bit around, why data analytics? What are we seeing? What is the business case for analytics? As we talked about, this is about strategy and my experience, all the different places that I've worked with in the consultant world, and now working in a data analytics group, there's just that frustrating history of dealing with so many disconnected data sources and the inability to get good data, and not just from everything from your everyday reporting needs to that ability to tie things to true strategic decision-making processes. It's been something that's, I know organizations have struggled with for many, many years. One of the things I like to go down memory lane a little bit, but I can think back 8 or 9 years ago when, a handful of people in conjunction with ASA's Tech Council, just a lot of conversations and sitting there having conversations with Reggie and others around, when if we could shift and really put data at the center of everything we did and really empower our staffs to have more access to data, to be able to look at analytics as a way to drive everything, drive our decision making, drive our strategy, drive our programs and products and services, and really have good insight and intel. And I think it's been a little bit of a lifelong mission of mine from tech positions and leadership positions to get organizations in that direction. And now with A2, that's, the fun part for me is that's what I get to do for everybody and try to help them get there. So that's exciting, that thinking that, where data is much more prevalent now, things we need to do. It's top of mind for everyone. And it's really giving organizations what they've always been asking for, which is answers. People got a lot of numbers, people got lists, but they didn't always have answers. And that's where you're getting into some of the data tying into the strategy. And we're going to go into that a little bit about detail about that. But you'll see on the slide here some of the kind of the anecdotal information Patrick mentioned. So I just want to put that out there because in associations, words like relevance and profitability and culture, all those things really matter. And how does data tie into that? One of the things we really want to see and what we want to do is have that ability to really dive in, for organizations to be able to see how are their programs, products, and services performing? Were they valuable to the members? Are they able to look in that and look at different pieces of data? Which ones have a lifespan? Which ones are drains on resources? How are you really evaluating them? Is it just, total registrations, total dollars? Are you really able to pull other pieces of data in and truly analyze where the member sees value? Why are they renewing, or why are they attending, or why are they doing these things? So that's, to me, when you start diving into that type of data and able to do true analytics, that's part of that business case for doing true analytics. And we see a lot of different. We're going to throw some numbers out here and some stats today, and some people are, some of our clients are on the call today, and happy if you guys want to jump in and give some of your stories as we go through. We're definitely going to have some time at the end to get people's feedback. But for instance, we saw one organization that was reported to us that they were able to grow profitability 15% in 1 year, just by really moving to good data guided decisions around their programs, their products, and their services, really diving in and looking at what mattered and what, and that's fully baking things in, really looking at what matters to your members and what is truly, what is truly profitable and what is not. Where are some of those sacred cows that we should get rid of, because we're looking at the data. We're not just listening, oh, we got to keep that. And then that's kind of been the business as usual way. Also, another point that we like to make is that, understanding your audience. That's one of the things we really focus on. And when we think about analytics and we talk with our clients, do you understand not just your members, but your non-members and your customers and everybody who might touch your organization through either attending an event or purchasing something or even donating something? But it's really, do you understand the customers, the people you're trying to reach? And do you understand them in a way that you can really target them? You can push things out. You can do a better job of understanding them, and that can help you to cut costs. You can really focus in on what people really find to be relevant, what people really want to consume, rather than treating everybody the same. So when people use data and look in that, and we're able to slice and dice by true behavior, what we push people to do is not just, what you tell me you're interested in isn't always what your behavior shows me that you're interested in. Far too often, organizations will ask a bunch of demographic questions when somebody joins, but then never repopulate profiles and information about those people to really drive and understand their audience and making sure they're capturing behavioral behaviors over time from their customers. So, we see organizations doing a lot of great things, but, the number popped out to us that one organization reported being able to really grow event profitability by over 30% just by better targeting, reducing marketing and advertising spend, getting the right people in the room. And when you think of true profitability, that probably brings even more reach and has residual effect of other programs and products and services that are tied to those events. So that's a pretty phenomenal number for an organization to grow in one year around that. One of the other things and other trends we kind of talk about and think about is, the willingness to measure what matters and ensure that what matters gets measured. And there's my dog. Hello, Bodie. Say hello to the audience. But really being able to, like I said, that's important to staff. I know in my times working in associations, one of the most frustrating things for other staff, but also for me, is when I couldn't give them an answer, when I couldn't say we're able to capture that, or we're able to measure that, or we're able to do that based on the data that we have. So just the willingness to do that and the capability of doing it is important. And we had, one organization reports to us that, they have higher staff retention just because of their willingness to dive into data analytics. They made it accessible. They made it useful. They give people the tools to do the job. So I think that's a true goal. I mean, if people want to be able to have access to data, that says a lot about your organization and your culture and what you're doing. So these are some, cool anecdotes. We probably have a ton more. We could talk all day. I'm sure Julie's got 100 stories, and so do I, but we thought we'd throw some of those out there. So, COVID-19 is certainly, as Patrick alluded to, this survey was done prior to COVID-19, and I look at the data at the end of that, and it was anecdotal information. I was cleaning some things up yesterday, and I pulled a jacket out, and a ticket fell out, and it was from Great Ideas in the spring. And I think that was the last time I had to look at a jacket because I just haven't been to anything. But it was all my information. But that coincidentally was right before COVID started, right the first week of March, and kind of when this survey ended. So it kind of gave me some relevance for today. I'm like, wow, that much time that has passed, and a lot of things have changed. What is the market showing us? We try to do environmental scanning all the time and see what's going on out there. And as Patrick said, things are moving faster, and data is highly important. I think the number one thing, as I alluded to, around kind of that identifying, where I talked about what we actually saw in the survey, where, being able to look at products and services that are meaningful and relevant and truly support the mission, and lifting those up, and being able to cut other things that aren't going to be what you need to do. That need for and willingness to make the changes driven by data is what I'm seeing now, and that's a little bit of a change. It was people moved slow in getting rid of, like I said, some of those sacred cows or some of those other things. Another trend we're seeing is kind of that shift to virtual, not just virtual learning. I really think virtual engagement is even more like it. That we talk about what we're doing. I mean, our meetings are virtual, our learning is virtual, how we run the business is virtual. So that was a fast pivot to me. Everybody, I'm sure all of my CIO colleagues and their teams were on their toes immediately about 6-7 months ago, and things have, calmed down, and it's brought a lot of change and patience with technology and things being different and not so formal all the time. But in my mind, I tell this to people all the time, I feel like that whole virtual event, or a virtual learning, some of the things we've been so afraid to experiment with and do over time, the world's probably jumped ahead 5 years. I mean, we're probably going to get there in 5 more years, where more events were hybrid or pure virtual, or people weren't afraid to do things, or cannibalize some of their own live things because they were afraid. Those are things you always heard. And like I said, I think this fast forwarded, the technology platforms have had to improve faster. Our capabilities of staff had to improve faster. And I think the data, being able to get to the data is an important part of that. And that's what we're starting to see, is that, people want different types of data now around learning and how people learn and what they're doing in virtual world. I think the other side is just, dashboard usage and data usage is really on the rise for everybody. People understand, I read had nothing to do with associations, but it was really that how much the general public has gotten used to data and dashboards because of COVID-19. I mean, every single day, if you think back to March, April, May, June, every day we're just inundated on TV with maps and visuals, and and on every single channel, but how much data was really presented in those visualizations, and how quickly you could digest such large amounts of data just by looking at a graph or a map. That resonates with people, and it makes kind of, when we talk about analytics and that past with visualizations and visualizing your data and doing new things with it, it resonates more with them because they get it, like, wow, I really could tell a story that meant something to me. I saw that. So I think, as Patrick said, the other thing is just now it's the general speed and velocity of the data that people want. And then, one of the things that the study showed us is, going backwards again, is that it's more common for most associations to apply data analytics to a retroactive or performance-based lens. How did we do? What did we do last year? What did we do last month? What did this event look like? Instead of really thinking forward-based, having that strategy-based lens where, what should we be doing, and how should we measure that, and what are the metrics we should be striving for, and how will data back us up? I think, one of the things around that approach is that with the pandemic, associations realized really how ill-equipped they actually were to truly make decisions that they needed to make. When you're just doing everything the same and it's business as usual, it doesn't work when the future looks nothing like what was behind you. There was hard things to measure. The first sign of panic we saw, there was really no data, nothing to base these decisions on, or nothing to even predict anything. I look at the picture that we put for the slide, and it probably should be like, the street in the rearview mirror, but like an asteroid field in front of you, because, the looking behind is something that makes sense, but looking ahead, it's completely uncharted territory for some of the organizations. So when you think about that, I mean, there's some key ideas I want you to think about is, historical trends may no longer be directly applicable, but they can still provide some insight. So the road ahead of you might not look like the road behind, but you can still learn something by where you've been. It's just not going to be apples to apples all the time. So having good data and having that ability to take the past insights and help you with the future is important. And so, at this point forward, we know it's going to be important to incorporate data into all the future decision-making processes. And you got to lay the groundwork now. You got to know what you want to measure and take risks, lay things out there. People are definitely doing that with things like virtual learning and stuff like that, really trying some new things and measuring it, looking at the data. How does it perform and how can we make decisions around that? It's just time to quit making excuses about it and why you can't do this. I think data is going to drive business from this point forward.
We do have a couple of questions. The first one was in the chat. So how much time and effort has to be allotted by marketing and membership staff to achieve some of the ROI we mentioned in the use cases? So I'm going to tell a story really quickly, and I won't, Jamie, I see you're on the call. I won't make you talk out loud, but repeatedly what we see is what works, I should say, is if these are your key metrics, I wouldn't be as concerned about how many hours this takes or allotting a certain amount of hours. We could probably dive into that if we think about it. But what I see really working is if you have a couple of metrics that you're shooting for, member retention, often one of them. Renewals really important right now because, again, people don't know how they're moving forward. And what we've seen organizations do is put together a task force is, I think, what Case had used whenever they saw some of the numbers. But if they weren't watching the numbers, they would have never put that task force together. And they were able to see results within a month. Same thing with the story around events and the 30% growth. That I think was over a couple of months, but the fact of it could be as simple as meeting about it, looking at the metrics, and then putting into action over the next 30 days what your membership and marketing team is going to do. Then you get back into a room and look at those results, and you will start to see the numbers change. And so how many hours it took action-wise in between those two, I'm not sure of that. Like I said, something we can gather, but more importantly, it's putting together the task force to look at those numbers, come up with the action plan, meet again to look at them. If you do that, you can see results in 1 month. Anything to add there? And then I have one question for you guys as well.
Yeah, I would only add, it's not a matter of new time spent. It's about membership and marketing teams really doing a lot of the things they're equipped to do, and it's in their everyday workload, but being better informed to make decisions around it and to do the right things. I think they're going down the same pathways. Just the decision points change and the drivers change, and then therefore the long-term metrics change. But it's not, I don't know that it's anything that different. It's pivoting on how you do it. Yeah.
And Jamie shared a little bit of insight in how they put together their team and why and what they are looking at. I'm happy to hear from anybody else too. I know there are others that have great stories to share. The other question that came in is it better to look at engagement levels of membership by function / executive level or in aggregate results across several viewpoints? So what do you guys think about that?
Ask that again.
Yeah. Is it better to look at engagement levels of membership by function, executive level, or in aggregate results across several viewpoints?
I'm sorry, David, go right ahead.
No, go ahead. My answer was going to be, I don't know. I think it's both. I think that's the value of having all that data in front of you. It's not an either or scenario. It's you need the capability to look at it from all angles and all ways.
Yeah, we'll talk about this in just a little bit, but one of the common themes about using data is sort of where do you start, and then how do you choose the right level so you don't get sort of bewildered by everything. And I think, one step is to really understand who your key audiences are. You might have an association that you realize career stage. As people enter into your association, they need one set of benefits. As they mature, they need another set of benefits. And so it's going to be really important for you to look at your engagement level data according to the individual's career stage or tenure, because that tells you a lot. In another case, it might be the level of seniority that they are in the organization, because you have benefits tailored for different levels. I would always start at from the point of view of, what does our audience look like as a whole, and what are the important segments there? But as David mentioned, you can look at everything. I mean, there's a wealth of data out there. That's one of the beautiful things about the way technology has progressed. We just have so much that we collect in today's day and age.
Great, thank you guys. And that, I think, is all of the questions for now, so take it away.
All right, well, we're gonna look at some of the results now, and this is my last slide before I turn over to Patrick, but I wanted to do a little poll of the audience, primarily around one of the first questions. When the survey asked, the survey asked, what are the main challenges in advancing the collection, use, implementation, or application of data in your association? And what you're seeing on the screen were, some of the top answers for that, what associations found. So we're going to put the little poll out and see how you guys feel about, how your organization, whether they have a comprehensive data strategy or not. And you may or may not know the answer, but take your best guess. And just, personally, what we kind of see in the organization, there is a wide variety of maturity from the aspect of data strategy. It's one of the things we first talk about when we go in and talk to any organization. What is your data strategy? What has it been to date? What are you trying to achieve? What are the answers you get from your data or want to get from your data? Are you thinking about it comprehensively across the organization and all the different data points that you have and how you collect data? And this number doesn't surprise me that 57% would feel like they lack an organizational data strategy. And I'm sure we could dive deeper into that number and see at what level of maturity the 43% that think they do really have. And we see a little bit of that all over the board around, our organizations really thinking about every data point. When we start diving in and working with a lot of our clients, people are, when they get that whole view of how much data they're actually collecting and from how many different systems and how many different ways they're collecting it and where things don't really match up, I think that's, some of them are shocked by it. And as we take the consultative approach, and I'm sure Patrick can allude to some of that too in their clients and they talk to, the number one thing I see is every new data point or every new piece of data is an add-on, and we just keep adding more things and collecting more things. We never go back and retroactively look at a complete organizational data strategy of, what do we really need to know about our members and our customers? What answers are we always trying to get? And then we're continually modifying some of those things so that we can, once again, measure what we need to measure. I think, go ahead and push the results out, Brian, if you've got those now from the first question. Yeah, that's good. 86% of our attendees feel like the organization, they lack a comprehensive data strategy. I read that wrong. So 86% do lack. And that doesn't shock me. That sounds about more accurate to what we normally see when we engage with organizations. One of the other top challenges that we saw, that organizations don't feel like they have the staff skills or expertise. This one, I think that some of this is perception. And I think when people think about data strategy and data analytics, they really focus on some of the hard stuff. And what we tell people typically is that a lot of orgs do have people with the right skill sets. Julie likes to say, you don't need to be a data wizard to do some of this stuff. We've got data scientists and people on our staff, but everybody doesn't need that. I mean, sometimes it's about focusing on the easy stuff first, and everybody wants to do the hardest things first. And we want to get into advanced predictive analytics on day one. I'm like, sometimes it is a growth up a maturity chart, as Patrick alluded to. So, that doesn't shock me. And then 46% report that, they're not streamlining data to measure across departments. And once again, that is certainly something we see. I mean, a lot of things we see are organizations aren't thinking holistically around that data strategy. And there's so many different data entry points that it's hard to measure things. I'll just give a quick example, and then I'm going to kick it over to Patrick, because I know we're looking at the clock, kind of talking long. But you really need to have some common data and certain metrics that you're looking for. One of the things we see a lot is every phase of the organization has a different set of demographics. Whether it's for their event or for the membership or for some certain program. And then it gets really hard to, do analysis on different cohorts of people by what you're thinking their demographics are, things like that. So you're not really, they don't have a good streamlined approach to have a single lens across the organization of everybody. That's one of the things. There's a bunch of different things. So that number is not all that shocking to me. And then, our clients are facing a lot of this stuff, and this is some of the areas that we try to help them with as we go through an analytics project. So I'm going to kick it over to you now, Patrick.
So one question, and this could be for either David or Patrick. It came up in this study, and it actually came up, I think, in a quote from Reggie, and has come up again. And, we talk about this comprehensive data strategy. How comprehensive do you think it has to be? And what I mean by that is, it's some people's approach that you have to know what you're working with first. And so you might have to prototype something, you might have to get into some, dashboards and some visualizations before you can even put together the comprehensive data strategy. Or would you start with the strategy roadmap? Kind of what's your take on that? Because there are two different schools of thought on this.
I mean, personally, I don't know that you need to dive right into dashboards to get to that point. Any good strategy, no matter whether it's a data strategy or any, you're starting with a thought and an idea of what you're trying to get to and what you're trying to achieve, and you're working backwards to how do we get there? What are the variety of paths? And you're analyzing each piece of that to put together a general framework, and then you start, things start hanging off of that framework, and you're building up the data. A comprehensive data strategy, it really isn't any different than any other strategy in how you build it in that foundational way. I find that for the people just don't know where to start, and then they want to answer, as I said, too many questions, and it's you don't always necessarily. You have to start with what you have a little bit, but it's really some of the basics. I mean, you may have 2 or 3 basic questions you want to know about your data, things that are very strategic. Are our members finding value? How do we know that? And then are we able to collect that data? So if you take some of those core strategic questions and you work back to, do we know those answers? And if not, why not? And if we need data to support it, where's that data coming from? And then do we have that data coming from all the right places? And then it grows out into answering all those questions. And each layer, you're ensuring that you're not doing duplicative work, or that you're not canceling out the data efforts on one side by doing something different over here, as we said, doing the things across departments. So it's a building block approach, but it doesn't have to start super complicated to me. Patrick, any?
Well, Julie, the attendee read my mind. That's actually the next bits of content that I'd like to cover. So let me see.
Jump in.
That a little bit. So this slide right here is another data point from our research. The question that we asked was, how accurately do the following statements describe your organization's data culture? And at the top of the screen, you can see some stats that there was the most amount of agreement, which are they use data as a tool for measuring impact, to anticipate and plan for the future, and to more effectively serve members and customers. Now, this is where interpretation comes into play. So that's what the data says. Now, my reaction to this is it's a little bit of a sobering statistic, because it's a good thing that there's the most amount of agreement with these statements. Ideally, at least from my point of view, that's what you should use data for: measuring your organizational impact, planning for the future. The other side of the coin is that you have almost as many associations that don't feel as they're using it for these purposes. And just kind of listening to some of the statistics that David covered a minute ago, and then hearing that the question about planning an organizational strategy, I think that has a long way to go in explaining these. It is very common for organizations to lack that strategy, for them to be a little bit apprehensive on whether they have the right skill sets, and also to face a lot of fragmentation throughout the sort of organizational structure. David, I don't know about your experience, but typically when I work with associations, they are on a journey that is really a range. We've been using the term maturity for the way they're handling data, but most often they don't have necessarily a comprehensive governance strategy. It's more likely to be sort of a fragmented, siloed approach where each department collects its own data. IT might have access to member records, membership might have access to member satisfaction data, and so forth. And those are what they use to answer their questions, but they usually want more. And they're just not able to collect that because that's not their job. To the question that Julie brought to us, how do you plan for organizational strategy along those lines? David was alluding to this. I think that you can start your journey from wherever you're at right now today. And don't be afraid to dig in and just, as Nike says, just do it. You don't need to be a wizard at data to get going. And one really helpful way to start in on this is simply to talk to your department heads. See what data they have access to and what they're collecting. More importantly, or equally as important, see what their priorities are like. What data do they need to be successful? And then that'll help tell you as an organization what your priorities should be. I would start, like David mentioned, I would start from the perspective of what do we actually need to learn about rather than what data do we have? Because I think if you just sort of assemble dashboards and collect data based on what you have, it's not really going to lead you to the right path for what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing I'll mention is that I've seen associations do this at a range of level of complexity. So even very large associations with budgets in the tens of millions of dollars, I have seen simply create a Dropbox folder or whatever their platform might be, and have their departments send report outs into that folder so that they're more accessible to everyone in the organization. As they mature, or maybe they'd like to do this right from the get-go, they might bring in an association analytics to kind of tie these things together so that you can live and breathe data and access what you need to at your fingertips. But really, there's no excuse for not using data today. There are always ways around whatever your technological hurdles might be or your staff hours. Associations will sometimes pull together a report and update it on a regular basis of the key data points that they know they need to track. And that's a way to have a shared understanding as an organization and access to data. So it's really about being creative. I want to pivot a little bit. This also speaks to the question of, how do you develop an organizational strategy? How do you get going on this? The place I'm pivoting to is data as a tool for strategy. So one of the fundamental ways that you can and should use data is in alignment with the highest level in the organization, which is ideally your strategic plan. A couple years ago, McKinley did a study to suss out a little bit about the degree to which associations are using strategic plans, how frequently they're updating them, and whether they are attaching data to them. And the good news is that most associations do have well thought out strategic plans that they update on a regular basis. One of the challenges is that they don't often, or at least in a majority of cases, they might not be inclined to operationalize that strategic plan. By that, I mean, if they have a new goal of developing a revenue stream in 2021, that's what it might live at in the strategic plan. We want to develop a new revenue stream. But what ideally you should be doing is attaching that to a specific metric. We want a new revenue stream that generates X number of dollars. Doing that is the way that you connect data to your planning. It's the way that you get to that point where David was saying, we're looking behind us in the mirror. How do we plan for forward and avoid those asteroids? Being intentional about the metrics that you're collecting and how you're going to use them will get you there. And a couple of pointers related to that. And this is through a lot of experience doing strategic planning and working with how you would make those plans more effective. One thing that associations sometimes struggle with as they're working through this exercise of taking all of these goals, translating them into data points, is that they might go to that step of identifying what's going to make us successful. You know, if they can do that, that's great, because that'll give everybody a common objective set of facts to talk about when you meet back as a leadership team. We all know if this program's been successful because we decided it would be if we hit this number. And these are objective data points that we're looking at, so nobody's using their sort of feelings about whether it's been successful. We have a common basis. It also keeps you honest. It keeps you driving towards that goal. But what sometimes doesn't happen is actually linking the actual expenses to those goals into that strategic plan as well. So you might want to look at both, we'll know this program is going to be successful if it generates X number of dollars, but we also want to look at how much is it going to cost us in the way of staff hours, in the way of investments and various things, so that we'll be able to have a fuller conversation. So doing that would be a way to encourage a more fuller conversation among leadership, as well as one that's going to be a little bit more honest in terms of giving you the data you need to make some decisions. Another pointer, this applies to strategic planning as well as filtering throughout the organization. And David talked about this in different ways, and I think Julie alluded to it as well. Focusing on strategic planning for a minute, if you do develop some data points and some goals, whether that's at any level in the organization or strategic planning, there is the tendency sometimes to not know exactly what goals you should establish, and perhaps not to see so much movement on them as you're hoping for. So this could be a member retention number. You want to see retention go up over a year, 2 years, 3 years. Could be something completely different. But what associations will sometimes do is plan out a particular goal and then see that the retention numbers aren't really changing all that much. And that can be a frustrating thing to observe. You're not sure why that is. You start to abandon your strategy of using data, when in truth, it is telling you something. It's telling you perhaps that either the goal is too aggressive, that, wow, it's actually a pretty big deal to raise your retention rate by 7-10%, whatever number. But it's also telling you that to get there, we can't just sort of set a goal and be really intentional about wanting it to happen. We actually have to plan some interventions, some innovations to get us there. So once you plan that goal, we want to raise retention by 7%. You need to figure out how that's going to happen. You need to come up with plans and programs that are going to get you there, not just sort of establish the goal. And when you meet back to discuss whether you're making those goals, you can talk about whether those initial targets were realistic or not, and why or why not they're happening. Another point I would make is getting back to David's point regarding staff skills. You don't need to be a data scientist or a statistician to establish these targets. It is true that it would help if you were a classical researcher or data scientist to know all of the mechanics and all of that kind of thing. But you can start with a very basic, reasonable level of knowledge about how associations work and say, we want to start tracking a few different points because we think this will help us make better decision making. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about reducing the risk in your decision making. And if you start somewhere, develop a couple of goals, we want to start tracking X, Y, and Z. That's going to be good enough to get you going. And you'll learn over time that some people will say, you know, it'd be more or that point, and you can make those decisions as you go along. It's about building muscle, not being perfect when you first start. Here are some pitfalls that I see really commonly. The first one is resisting the temptation to measure everything. David and Julie might have a particular perspective on this as well, that have access to so much data. The quote on the screen is, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. That's attributed to Einstein. You know, what I see a lot is that when associations figure out they have a platform or a way of measuring data, the excitement of that gets unleashed. It's telling you a lot of things. It's encouraging a more robust conversation, and the temptation is, let's throw it all in there. Let's look at everything. And that can be bewildering because it can be a difficult thing to have a conversation around 50, 60, 70 data points. Sometimes those data points are going to contradict one another. It's certainly, unless you're using something like A2 offers, it's going to take a lot of staff effort to pull all of that together. It's just going to be a more difficult thing. So what I find to be more helpful is choosing a very streamlined model for what you want to measure, picking a few data points that are going to be meaningful to you, and starting there. If you need to add more later, you can do that. Also, be realistic with how you're planning on using your data, because it's never going to answer all of the questions for you. That's what your job is as an expert in running your association, or your job as a leader, volunteer leader for the association. Data is about reducing in my opinion, it's about reducing the level of risk with decision making. So if you go into it with that expectation in mind, it'll help to support honest conversations about what that data means and the decisions that you will ultimately end up making. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to skip ahead past the next slide, Julie, if we want to encourage just some questions and discussion at this point.
Yeah, I see it's Christopher threw out a couple of issues that maybe we can talk about, other people can chime in. There were 3 things listed that I think align with a lot of the conversation and results that we've seen. So they are knowledge of the data, quality of the data, and then skills to manipulate the data into information. So is that what you saw coming out of this study, and any recommendations on how to tackle any of these issues or challenges? Because I'm sure he's not the only one.
Yeah. Well, David, I'd be happy to start, and I think you'll have a really valuable opinion on this. I think all 3 of those are completely legitimate questions and concerns. The knowledge of the data, if you're not used to getting your hands in there, is really key, because you can't just take data and not be aware of how it's constructed and the holes in it and like weird little things. A classic example is, maybe you have a database that shows a join date for an individual, and whoever initially constructed that, for anybody that was missing in the database, just put 1999. And so if you work with that data without really understanding its hygiene, you're going to have some funky results that don't really reflect what you're interested in. Absolutely important for whoever's pulling that data to be aware of it, to clean it. That's part of the process. Again, it doesn't need to be super complicated, but you do need to make sure that you understand it well enough to know what it's speaking to. Julie, I'm sorry, the second point was regarding how to actually, was it manipulate it? And could you just repeat that for me?
Yeah, sure. So the next one was skills to manipulate the data into information. And this is the golden skill, right? Where you look at, data in any form, whether it's a visualization, I mean, certainly easier than raw data, and interpret that into some sort of actionable insight or item for your association to take away. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they sometimes talk about data science being divided into different skill sets, and one of those is like storyteller and narrative and that kind of thing. And I think that there is something to be said with you look at a data point, you're able to make a chart out of it, whatever you do with that, and being able to look at it as, what pattern is this telling? Is this suggesting for our association? What insight can I draw from that? What I promise you is that even if you don't have that as your inherent skill set, even if you look at data, it doesn't speak to you, but you're simply able to read off, this segment in our membership, early careerists feels more powerfully about this than our late careerists. That everybody will have an opinion that you bring that to. And so if you're maybe a little bit weak there, that's where some of the conversation can come into play too. That might not be a fully satisfying answer, because maybe at the end of the day, what you want is to be able to provide the the distilled insights to your colleagues. But I think that at a basic level, any one individual interpreting those data points is one individual, and you're probably going to need them to react as well. David, do you want to contribute any additional?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make a product pitch, but I mean, that's why people come to us and are interested in our product, because there's the pieces of it that are there. It's, you know, that's exactly the life cycle of what we go through in dealing with our clients. They've got a lot of knowledge about their data, and we really work with that. But data quality is an issue across the board. There's a lot of things you can do to address that, from, you know, some of the things we talked about, how you actually collect data, store data, keep data, renew data, update data, delete data, is all part of the data quality equation. But the skills to truly manipulate the data into information, you know, that is a skill. That is some of the data science piece. That is the pieces of, you know, an analytics platform can help you with. And then it's still learning how to tell the story about what you're seeing. You know, I think I saw in the chat at some point, somebody posted something about when people don't believe the data you're telling them, and they say you must be wrong. And that's, you know, that's what we also deal with that. And like, you know, the data is the data. If you understand how that's been manipulated into a story or an answer, and can evangelize around that, visualizations help tell that story. That's why some of the analytics are a very powerful tool. And that's a lot of what we do with clients, from how we try to work with them on how to make analytics successful in their organization. It's that getting it into the culture. And I know saw the word culture in the chat a lot too. It is that people need to start trusting what they're seeing, understanding what they're seeing, and not taking it personally. I mean, I think that goes back to some of the overall organizational strategy piece. It's like, we're all here in this together. This isn't, you know, people often see data analytics as a report card or a scorecard, and a lot of them are called scorecard, but it's not. I mean, it's so that we can unlock things we need to unlock and make decisions to move forward together. And it's not my data and their data, it's everybody's data. So I think I hope I answered a little bit of that when I was trying to wrap it up in some of the general strategic conversation too.
Yeah. And something I often hear is when you break down that transparency, you go from an organization that is using data for the defense and to defend yourself or your you know, department, to offense, right, as an organization. And that plays into some of the culture conversation that was going on, and to also thinking about, yes, you will have to consider culture changes and change management if you want to be a data-led organization. It really just comes down to communication. I think everybody wants to be there. We did a survey a couple of years ago, and those were the results. Everybody's like, yes, I want to be a data you know, driven or data guided organization. But then when you dove into the questions around what they were doing, or some questions that dove a little bit into culture, that didn't necessarily support that vision. And so there are simple steps I threw out in the chat. American Counseling Association is doing a fantastic job of a communication plan around adoption and changing their data culture. So I'm happy to tap them and see if they'd be willing to share a story with you guys. A lot of great examples of people really moving the needle. And, you know, I think as we move into the next webinar, which is coming up on Wednesday, November 4th, all three in the series at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, we're going to talk about building data-driven member and customer experiences. So really diving into a little bit more of the details. You start with this strategy and framework, and then you really need to execute against it, right? And that's what the next two webinars will entail. So operationalizing data and analytics, and then building data-driven member and customer experiences. We have a couple of questions that we didn't quite get to. We will address those. We'll reach out to you and get you some answers. I hope everybody got some value out of today and talking about strategy. Certainly some takeaways to be had. So thank you, Patrick. Thank you, David. And thank you everybody in the audience for joining and participating in the conversation. Have Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.